To begin your clay project, you need to first start with a cube of clay, and then we're going to gently pound or mold that block of clay into a sphere. Now you want to be very gentle with what you're doing. You don't want to hear a loud slapping noise when you're tapping on your clay, because that means you're giving it too much pressure at this point. Just a nice gentle tapping, sometimes with the palm of your hand where you have a natural curve, will help you to get that curve. And you just need to be very gentle and go ahead and keep forming that into the ball. At some point when it is a nice ball, you're going to find that you're going to want to refine it a little bit more. And to do that, you will want to cup your fingers a little more so that your ball is cupping into your fingers. Rolling it also in between your hands will help to form it a little bit more. You may have to work with some little indentations, working those in, punching those together so that you don't have large wrinkles or divots in your clay. But again, be very gentle with what you're doing, because only small movements will be effective. If you make large movements, you're going to have larger areas to have to fix potentially. So just gently mold your clay until you get that nice rounded shape. Here you can see again, I've talked about using my cupped fingers, and here's how that works. We're just about to the point where we have a nice sphere shape from our cube. And this is where we want to be before we begin our pinch pot process for making our mug. There we have it. Looks like we're ready to go. Now the next part of our process is going to be actually making the pinch pot. We have our nice round sphere that we've made out of our cube of clay, and now we're going to just take a thumb and we're going to just gently press down into that sphere. Now you don't want to go all the way through the bottom, but you will sort of feel in the palm of your hand that's holding the clay, you'll kind of feel a small pressure at the bottom, like a little lump coming toward your hand. When you feel that little lump coming toward the palm of your hand, you've probably made the hole deep enough with your thumb. Now you're going to use your hands as pinchers. You're going to use your thumb on the inside and your forefingers on the outside, so that you can be working both the inside and the outside of your pot at the same time. Again, you'll notice I'm supporting my piece of clay with one hand, and I'm gently moving around. I'm not pinching a lot, I'm pinching very gently. Forefingers on the outside, my thumb on the inside. And I'm making that hole in the center where my thumb initially was larger each time. And I'm going to do that a couple of times around the clay to make sure that I'm kind of working the bottom so that I get a nice even bottom. And I'm starting to work the sides a little bit now too. Now I have enough that I can go ahead and put both thumbs in at the same time and have 8 fingers around the outside, and I can really move a larger amount of clay with my fingers at this point. What I'm going to try to do is get to be so that my walls and my bottom of my pot are going to be about a half or fourth an inch to a half an inch in thickness. We don't want them too thick and we don't want them too thin. You'll notice that my pot is getting a little bit bigger, and I need to be conscious of how the shape is going to be on the outside. Do I want it to be flared a little bit, or do I want it to be more straight up and down? Those are the kinds of decisions that you need to be making now as the artist. Now we're to the point where we can start to perfect it a little bit and really get that shape that we want. It may be a little uneven in the bottom, so just go in and gently work with those little ridges that may have developed from your fingers. It's absolutely normal. You can also do what I call petting the clay, and that's just a nice, easy way to gently smooth any cracks, any small divots, any ridges that you may have. So again, just gently working so that we get our basic form down for our mug that we're going to be making. You may find that to help shape the outside of your mug, if you just very gently roll it on your surface. Now be mindful that you won't want to give a lot of pressure to that, because you will smash your form on the inside and you'll end up with a flat piece, and that's not what we want at this point. Again, you can just gently smooth out any imperfections on that outside. It is very difficult to see in the video, but I want to just remind you that I'm only giving very slight pressure, very little pressure whatsoever to move the clay. The clay we happen to be working with is very soft, so we do want to be very careful that we don't damage it in any way. We want to move it just a little bit at a time so we don't have any big corrections, if you might say, to fix. You may find that the more you work with it, you may need to just use a slight spray of water. I always say just one pump. You don't want to add a lot of water to the clay because then it gets very, very soft. Just one little pump here and there will help to reduce the friction of your hands moving across the clay particles. That will help you to maybe reduce some of those very fine cracks and to get some of that smoothing done just a little more efficiently. You may find that the top of your mug or pot at this point is a little uneven. So if you just gently take it and turn it upside down and just gently press down to the table surface, you may be able to flatten out just those small imperfections in the height of the walls. If you have significant differences in the heights of your walls, we may have to do a little trimming, but do try this method first. You may have to, work with it a couple of times. Then most importantly, one of the last things that you're going to need to do is to put your name or your initials on it. I always like to use just a nice sharp pencil, and working fairly large. You also want to put what section you're in so that it's identifiable with which class this particular piece belongs to. And some people like to put the year or the date that this piece was made on the bottom. You may do that if you'd like. You do not have to add the year, but most definitely you need your first and last initials and your section of class that you are with. Now we need to do a little planning for the adding of the features on our mug. Here's a mug that I've made before for this project, and we're going to add some facial features. So let's just kind of take a look at what we need to have here. First, you need to have at least one ear. You may have 2 ears. My mug has 2 ears, and those serve as the handles for my mug. Very durable. Second, you need to have eyes, and I do want 2 eyes, so I emphasize the S on the eyes. Third, we need to have a nose of some sort. We also need to have some eyebrows, and I think you can be creative with eyebrows. You could substitute glasses instead of eyebrows if you wanted to. And lastly, you need to have a mouth. Teeth are optional, but teeth sometimes will really add some element of ugliness since we're going for an ugly mug, or a silly mug, I guess. We don't need to call it necessarily ugly, but a silly mug. You'll notice on the back I did some carving into the clay with some tools to simulate hair, and we'll also talk about different glaze options and glaze choices after our piece has been fired in the kiln. Now to do the little planning process, you want to gently sketch the outside shape or form of the pinch pot that you've made, and then just go ahead and start sketching in the different pieces that you need to have on your mug. If you'll notice here, I'll just kind of do a little sketch of the mug that I already did. I used coils of clay to make my handles or my ears, so I'm going to just draw those on. And this is not a perfect sketch, but a little rough sketch, so you have some ideas of what you're going to work with when you work with your piece the next time. I added in my eyes and pupils, got my eyebrows here that I just added on, adding in my nose, just kind of an indication of where my nose was going to go. Then I had some lips and my upper lip here first, and it was kind of really big, and then I have just the upper lip, so then I could add in those teeth that were on the mug, and then this would have been my plan for my ugly mug. Then the next time we would come to class, I would get out my mug shape and some extra clay, and I will begin adding these features on. And again, make sure your name and your section is on your paper so that in case it gets misplaced, we know who it belongs to and we'll be ready to work. Now we're ready to begin adding the facial features to our mug. So starting with the pinch pot that we made last time and having our plan handy, we're ready to begin. You need to think about, where am I going to start? Which feature am I going to work with first? Using extra clay, you're going to then decide. And I think I'm going to start with at least one of my ears. And for that, I need to make a coil. I begin by rolling a piece of clay between my hands to start getting that coil shape. Then I take it to the table and I roll on the table. I always start in the middle and work my way out. Helps to make a more uniformly shaped coil. So as soon as you have the coil as thin as you'd like, then you're ready to start putting it onto your pot. Before we can add two pieces of clay together, it's always important that you do scoring, which is roughing up the surface. I like to call that making Velcro. It is important that you rough up both surfaces of clay that are going to be joined together. Then you'll need to add a little bit of water. We call this adding slip. Slip is basically watery clay. Then you kind of smoosh it together, twisting it, adhering it, and then smoothing out any edges around it to make sure that it is going to be adhered very strongly to your structure. Once you have that done, you're able to go ahead and work with forming the shape that you're wanting to get. And you may have to estimate how much clay you're going to need. You may have to cut some pieces off and then form it in. And now we're going to be looking at adding this piece of clay, so it's going to touch in another spot, so we need to rough up that area as well. And the coil itself. Add a little spritz of water. Call that our glue, kind of. Then go ahead and kind of smoosh it together, but yet keeping your form, and then smoothing out to make it sure it's adhered to your form very securely. and there would be one of my ears or one of my handles. Next, I'm going to work with an additional piece of clay, and I'm going to roll it into a ball between my hands, and I'm actually going to smash it down just a little bit to make it a little flatter so that it doesn't stick out so far from my pot. I'm going to think about where I want to add that on, and then I'm going to make note of that, make a little indentation for it to kind of nestle into. Again, I'm supporting the inside of the pot when I'm doing this, scoring both pieces, adding a little water, and it doesn't take much, and then smooshing it together. And if I need to, I can smooth out any areas. And there we go, smooth that out. And I want to make sure that I have my shape just the way I want it. And then I'm going to add a little pupil. I'm just going to use an eraser point to add that little indentation into my clay. I'd go ahead and I'd work then with putting on the second eyeball. And now working with another piece of clay, I'll work on forming my nose to add to my pot. Just kind of pinching it into shape, giving that basic shape that I'm looking for, smoothing out any bumps or cracks that I don't want to have there. Maybe size it up a little bit to make sure it's going to fit. Get it a little flat here, and a little more perfection. Oh, a little too thick around the bridge, so I'm going to have to squeeze that in, narrow that up a little bit. And maybe just a tiny bit more. There we go. And then I think I'm ready to go ahead and add that on. Again, scoring. Can't stress enough how important that scoring and adding the water is. That's what's going to keep it all together when it's drying in the air before we put it in the kiln. If we don't do the scoring and slip, then we won't be able to, we run the risk of having some pieces fall off as it dries in the air. And we definitely don't want to put all the work into it and then have it fall apart. So it's important that we take the time to do those steps. Again, kind of smushing it on, smoothing it out, fixing it up the way that we want. Add a little water if you need to, so you don't have quite as much friction there. Make it a little smoother, a little slicker to work with. Working with the underside of my nose, using some of my tools to help smooth things out. Again, though, I'm working very gently, not a lot of pressure being applied, just working very gently with the clay. Then I want some nostrils, so I'm going to use that same pencil eraser to stick into the clay there and add that little detail. Using another part of my coil, I'm going to form my eyebrows. Just kind of more tapered at one end, more pointed, and then kind of flattening out a little bit, sizing those up where I want to put those on. And going through the steps again, scoring, adding the water, just laying it on there to make sure it's in the right place before I get some water and adhere to that. Again, using some of the coil that I have, I'm going to go ahead and form the upper lip at least, and I'm using just a pencil to help make the little indentation there at the top of the lip. Get my fingers in there, kind of form that a little further. Use what you have. Now, I'm not sure, is this looking like a lip or is it looking more like a mustache? I may have to have a change, a slight change in my plan. We'll see what we come up with here. And it's okay if your plan changes slightly. Now I'm going to just kind of smooth that to the bottom and blend it kind of into the bottom of my pot. So it's actually going to be resting right on the table. So it looks like for this one I might not have my teeth, and it looks a little bit more like a mustache than an upper lip, so we might just go with that. Again, using a little more water to help smooth out any imperfections to get our pot ready, so that we're satisfied with the final product to be ready to be air dried before we can put it into the kiln.